Hello, and welcome back to the 4am Report. We're continuing with our series about business casing a podcast, especially if you're trying to convince a boss or a stakeholder about the value of podcasting, or if podcasting is on your mandate and you're trying to best figure out the ways in which to plan this. So, today's detail we've covered, if you haven't heard them, you should probably go back and listen to episode 158 and 159, in which we broke down, number one, how it is that your podcast can handle the ability to up-level your content marketing and put a lot more on your editorial calendar. And then in the next episode, we talked about the consolidation of podcasts, where people have learned, I think, quite efficiently how to break things down, but join them together and consolidate and create like masterclass episodes, webinar episodes, roundup emails, and even if you're so lucky, sort of the holy grail of it all, which is like books, right? So those were the two. If you haven't heard them, you should probably listen to them now. But if you have heard them, then move on through to the next one, which is how to dismiss the myths that surround podcasting. At any given time, there's a lot going on. Like for the last year or so, we've been doing a live show every week where we cover the news of the week. And every week there's been news about podcasting. So it's changing at warp speed. That said, some of the myths that you can dispel are that this is not an over-index situation. There aren't too many podcast folks. There are far from oversaturation issues like you might read in the headlines. Like when you compare podcasts to blogs and vlogs, you're at least 10, if not 100 times lower in terms of what the market sees, right? So YouTube's continuing, even though YouTube has like 50 million videos and there's really only 2 million podcasts. So here's a universal truth that you need to know. Like, I mean, in this episode, we're going to break some of them down. Listen to this sort of curation of clips that I've put together for you. There are a few key things to consider. Number one, you've got a niche. Number two, any way in which you can sort of like cut clutter is a good idea. And number three is that if you don't fully utilize the recording that you have on hand, you've probably failed the task. So those are the things, if you focus on them, regardless of the degree of saturation of the market, your podcast is probably going to do well. That, and it's no secret that I think that if you structure your podcast with an intention to gain business instead of an intention to gain audience alone, you're probably going to be seeing much more success. More soon. Take a look at these clips. Welcome to the 4am Report. On this podcast, we dish about fresh-pressed, fun marketing. If you're stressed out and awake at night again, wondering what to do, you found your joy. I'm your host, Susan Diaz, podcasting founder, humor junkie, observer of human behavior patterns, and mom. Each week, I'm joined by a different co-host to break down the latest headlines at the intersection of marketing and entertainment. You know what? Podcasting was something that was considered a commute thing. Like everybody thought that people only listened to podcasts when you were like on a commute and whatever. And there was some fears around the pandemic and people not commuting that podcasting wasn't doing so well, which is now not a fact. It's people listen during all kinds of other activities. There's data to prove that. The second part of it is that taking away that in-person event thing and that possibility of conversations and networking from the table has meant that more and more people are trying to find other things, right? Like whether it's guesting on other people's podcasts, speaking at virtual events, connecting in smaller masterminds. That's kind of the replacement, and podcasting has a big role to play there. So I definitely think that people's dismissal of podcasts is somewhat myopic because, if you're saying there's too much out there, that's not factual. It's just that you're hearing more about it now. There's only like 1 million and something podcasts versus 500 million blogs, and nobody hesitates to start a blog to get people to like a website
so
automatically
true.
has a blog, right? I mean,
it's so true. I think one of the things one of the things that I've heard from people when they say, does the world really need another podcast? It's because we have seen over the past year the proliferation of like hundreds and thousands of new podcasts, and traditional media outlets have invested in many sub podcasts, micro podcasts, podcasts featuring their hosts or whatever. I think a lot of people maybe are feeling that the market is super saturated with podcasts. But what you're saying, I think, is a really interesting perspective point. It's like, we don't worry about the number of videos on YouTube. We don't worry about the number of blog posts. So let's look at that the same way. Yeah.
And I think people have heard that argument made on a cerebral level, but just like really start to absorb it and see where you're putting your time as marketers and where it best serves you. So as it stands in 2021, it's still a good place to be. So with that in mind, can we offer up a few universal truths, Will? I mean, are there any, like, these are the must-dos?
Well, yeah, for sure. Especially when people have asked us about, okay, so I'm going to do a podcast, start a podcast, but how do I stand out when there is so much more competition than there was a year ago? So my first tip would really be to really niche who your target audience is. Don't just say we're a marketing podcast and talk to everyone from the solopreneur to the marketing specialist to the VP of integrated communications at whatever big company. Define find a niche and lean into that niche. And that's the way you're going to find your people in your community.
Mm-hmm. So should we like try to put an example to it? I mean,
yes.
For those that follow our podcast, obviously we started in a more generalist space, but even right at the beginning, we were quite clear about what our hook was, and our hook was that psychographic. It's like, what's keeping you up at night? Like, what's behind it, the pain points. And we're often not going to bring you marketing jargon-filled stuff like MQLs and SQOs. And nope, there's lots of other people there to give you that stuff. We give you much more of the back end. That's us. But you were talking about potentially like a parenting podcast as another example.
Yeah, I was saying, don't just say, I'm going to do a podcast. I'm a parenting coach, so I'm going to do a podcast for every parent that every parent would listen to. Why not focus on a niche within that genre? So maybe it's a podcast about parenting advice for toddlers or for parents of toddlers and getting you through those terrible 2s, 3s, 4s, whatever. Niching in on that. And that's where I think you're going to get some momentum in this crowded space. Another point that you had made, Susan, was about cutting the clutter when it comes to your podcast. Don't think everybody wants to hear about how your day was. I mean, you're not a big celebrity where we actually would listen to about your amazing day. And get rid of those long, overly produced intros. That I think is important right now. No one has patience for listening to unnecessary things.
I agree. You should get straight to the topic, leave out all of the extras, and then I specifically dislike things like being held hostage to 3 or 4 minutes of you pitching me in the middle of a podcast. Like that kind of stuff, I think we've passed that as marketers. We should be a little bit more elegant in our delivery. So like promise 3 points, deliver the 3 points, recap the 3 points, get the hell out, right? I mean, and even with interviews with guests, I think that's great. I mean, I definitely think there's room for the long form podcast, like the hour long, like people often talk about, what is his name? Joe Rogan's 4-hour podcast and the fact that people will listen to it. Well, yes, because they signed up for that over going on that journey for a while. I really don't think there's space for that in the business world, right? So we need to like respect people's time and give that to them. So that's the second thing, cut all the fluff. And our third point was utilization, right?
Yes. So something I always say is you need to be putting as much time into what you're putting out to promote your podcast as the actual production and planning and strategy behind the podcast. People are going to know that you're doing a podcast, talking about topics. If you're posting, smart, engaging things with beautiful images on social media, they're going to know you from that more than the actual podcast. How many people will actually click through to listen to every one of your podcasts, but they know you're doing it every week because you are consistent and disciplined about posting about it. And again, something we always say, be as entertaining as you can when you're posting about this. There's we're all kind of at that breaking point of too much on every channel. Provide a little entertainment.
Correct. Distribution is 90% of the job. And if you are going to distribute as much as you should, like Will says, it's kind of a responsibility to make it a little bit more engaging. It's a horrible word, but make it a little bit less boring if you want people to notice you and bring a bit of a smile to their face. So yes, those are our 3 points right there, folks. The first of them is really niche. Think about who your audience is. The narrower, the better. The second one is cut all the fluff, keep it simple, straightforward. Short is not necessarily always best, but whichever format you're doing, be clear and non-salesy. And then the third one is distribution. Really fully use it. Remember that you're bored before your audience is.
And if you want a guide that we produced about a year ago, when we found out that we had jumped up to number 25 or something in the marketing charts, we were really proud of that achievement. So we decided to put our process down, and we put together and published a guide, which we'll put the link in the show notes or the social copy here. But it's, no email necessary. Take the guide and use it if you are interested in starting or improving a podcast that you already have.
Yep. Thank you for listening to the 4 a.m. report. If you like what you're hearing, we'd love if you left us a 5-star review. Thank you.